It is hard to think about war in Europe. In the modern context, war usually appears when relating to the Middle East, Africa, and South America. Be it a war against terrorism, war between tribes, or war on drugs, we don't tend to hear about war in Europe. However, a lot of people forget, or do not even know, that war is in fact very near. Ukraine was a heavily conflicting area ever since the Euromaidan in November 2013. The next step was the Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014, which effectively sparked the rebellious movements in the east of Ukraine. Backed by the Russian military, a new self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic emerged, occupying a large portion of the eastern Ukraine. All of the events happened with such speed that it could confuse not only Ukraine, but Europe and the whole world overall. Perhaps the most interesting fact about the war is the media that is being projected onto both sides of the conflict. Essentially, in this conflict, there is the West and then there is Russia, both carrying out not only ground operations, but also an information war through photographs, videos, and news reports. Largely using the concepts discussed by Susan Sontag in her book Regarding the Pain of Others, as well as other readings and ideas mentioned in class, I will conduct an analysis and evaluation of the media used in the conflict and its ethicality. Ukraine's media evolved very much over the course of the war. At first, it was about a scream for help from the West, as well as showing itself as a victim of a big aggressor, Russia. However, I will focus on the recent media that came out not only from Ukraine itself, but also from the Western news channels such as BBC and Time magazine. The first image shows a newly recruited Azov paramilitary battalion soldier embracing his girlfriend before leaving for the front lines. This image struck me as it was from the Time magazine, showing a romantic scenery of war. I will explain more about the romanticism using the following photographs by an ex-Ukrainian Defense Agency member, Dmytro Muravsky. The first three images show a representation of war that is romantic without a doubt. A look of determination and focus. An APC mounted by a big group of soldiers holding the national flag, and a proud, fearless soldier facing the dangers ahead of him with his head high. As Susan Sontag mentions, historically, photographers have offered mostly positive images of the warrior's trade, and of the satisfactions of starting a war or continuing to fight one. It appears that this tendency is still very much in use, especially in the war in the Donbass. Muravsky photographs depict a life of a soldier that is quite clean, safe, and beautiful, as if being a soldier in this war is something to be proud of and praise. To add on to these photographs, the Ukrainian army often produces promotional videos about the army featuring footage from the war in Donbass. The video features epic music well put together with impressive footage of soldiers, tanks, cannons, and other war machinery in action. The combination of such footage with the music really shows a kind of praise and glorification of war and life of a soldier. Beautifying is one classic operation of the camera, and it tends to bleach out a moral response to what is shown. However, neither the photographs of Dmytro nor the inspiring Ukrainian army videos depict the ugly parts of this war, such as constant fear, hunger, dirt, and death. In fact, the only published and widespread photograph that Muravsky took at the front lines of the conflict was one that depicted two Ukrainian soldiers helping the wounded comrade while running away from a blast in the background. Nevertheless, numerous journalists and war photographers spoke out that it is a certainly fake and staged photo. One of the people that joined this claim was a commander of the Ukrainian battalion whose soldiers are depicted on the photo, even though two of the soldiers featured say that this was a real situation. The Ukrainian ministry acted quick upon the claims and decided to fire Muravsky out of the office, justifying such actions by saying that Ukraine will not follow the Russian example of staging photographs and spreading fake news. Staging photographs and changing or making up stories is extremely unethical, as it is essentially deception of a public and manipulation of a message for the benefit of someone or some cause. This is a tactic that is undoubtedly immoral and wrong, but stays continuously in use among the modern societies. After discussing the romanticization of war, it is interesting to have a look at other Western news outlets depicting this war. While searching on the major networks such as CNN, BBC, New York Times, The Telegraph, The Washington Post, etc., I found that most of the articles and videos stick to a similar tendency that can be summarized by just two sources from the BBC. The first one is a video with the title "Ukraine's Children Paying the Price of War." It features a girl that lost her hair due to a psychological trauma caused by artillery shelling, as well as other children who are claimed to be in distress. The description of the video reads, "Many kids face decades of pain because the trauma of living on the front line is not being treated." The second one is a video titled "Ukraine's Conflict. Cars burn amid Donetsk shelling." Here, after heavy shelling, a fire broke out in one of the ruined houses with cars in it. The aftermath shows the burned down cars and a destroyed building. All of this leads to the point that images of dead civilians and smashed houses may serve to quicken hatred of the foe. In this case, however, it is images of traumatized children together with damaged houses in one video, and a completely destroyed house with a burned down ambulance in another. These images are not fake and do not exactly manipulate the situation, but subtly they do increase a sort of hatred towards the enemy, in this case, the rebels. Following my research, I found out that this is very widespread not only in the war of Donbass, but also in other conflicts. For example, there is a video titled "Syrian Children Paying the Price of War," also by BBC, talking about the Syrian war refugee children. Although these kinds of things do not seem to imply anything unethical, it may appear as somewhat manipulative. Even though platforms like BBC try to stay neutral, things like this can also be unethical. They're essentially showing footage of suffering of one of the sides of the conflict. They do not show the damage done by the Ukrainian army in the DPR's area, or the traumatized children that probably exist on the other side. This can form a one-sided image in the viewer and help him or her sympathize with Ukraine and form some hatred towards the rebels of the Donetsk People's Republic. To some extent, even this seemingly harmless move can in fact be deemed unethical, as it manipulates a story in order to benefit one side. But then again, does neutral journalism even exist? Admittedly, the more obvious and scandalous unethical messages are spread by the Russian government and the Donetsk People's Republic. Russia is known for actively spreading propaganda and disinformation, and the war in Donbass is filled with it. First example that I will discuss is the message from a Donetsk People's Republic commander expressing his satisfaction with actions of the army that supposedly blew up a Ukrainian tank. However, the photograph itself was taken in the Tiananmen Square in 1989. There are other numerous examples related to this case of photo reusage. For example, in October 2014, the most watched Russian TV channel, First Channel, spread the story of a hacker group displaying the hidden photographs that the Ukrainian government wanted to hide from its people around TVs in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. The images shown were mass graves with civilians in them. The purpose was to show the atrocities of war committed by the Ukrainian government. However, it was discovered that in fact the images shown were from mass graves in Chechnya in 1995, when the Russian military took out a group of Chechen rebels. A wider range of disinformation in the Russian media surrounds children. In July 2014, First Channel made a report about a refugee woman that shares a moving story about how the Ukrainian army entered the previously rebel-held Sloviansk and carried out a public crucifixion of a 3-year-old child. This story gathered a lot of attention in Russia, and many questioned whether the Ukrainian army was even human. Nevertheless, as expected, the whole thing is staged. The woman is indeed a Ukrainian refugee in Russia. However, when reporters went to Slavyansk and asked numerous citizens living around the supposed place of public crucifixion, no one had any idea about it. Other stories related to the Ukrainian army killing children were widely spread on the Russian social networks such as VKontakte. However, when looked into, they were found to be fake. The stories featured children that already died in Syrian conflict, were victims of rape, religious fanatism, and accidents. A photograph or a film document available on television or the internet is judged a fake when it turns out to be deceiving the viewer about the scene it purports to depict. Therefore, these images and film documents are fakes as they completely deceive the viewer. They depict real deaths in a fake situation. It is honestly sickening to know that these unethical acts occur with such normality. The purpose of these messages is clear, however. It is to completely dehumanize the enemy and make it easier for people to develop strong feelings of hatred. Susan mentions it quite correctly. It is easier to think of the enemy as a savage who kills than holds up the head of his prey for all to see. This is the approach the Russian government took in order to turn its population against the very people they called brothers the day before. The war in Donbass is surrounded by lies, disinformation, and fake news. Most of these unethical actions are taken by the Russian government and the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. The book, Understanding Media Ethics, asks interesting questions like, is it right to lie to tell a good story? Do the visual media have particular responsibilities for their impact on audiences? And to what extent must the media maintain balance and objectivity? After such an in-depth analysis of the whole situation and having personal links to the conflict, these questions really made me think even more in depth rather than have a clearer response. I'm a believer that lying is wrong, and manipulating information for your benefit is as well, especially when it comes to conflicts of such a scale. However, is it ever even possible to be completely balanced without giving the slightest hint of your own view on a situation? I was hoping to leave this project with a better idea on what is white and what is black, but all I see are more and more shades of gray.